As we've gone through this series and we've talked about how Christians engage with culture, I've been quoting from a book written by Nancy Pearcey called Total Truth. And she argues for the necessity of a Christian worldview that helps us engage with the world and not just walk away from it, put up our own little walls and live in our communes. So she says this: traditionally, the arts have been regarded as an expression of truth. Even though they make sense or they make use of myth and metaphor, the arts convey deep truths about the human condition. In the Enlightenment, however, rationalist critics began to denounce the arts. The true world, revealed by science, was contrasted to the false world invented by poets and painters. So as we have built and continue to build this new community of faith, we have identified these three statements as our vision statement: that we are compelled by love, we are convinced by faith, and we are engaged in life. This is what we want to be. This is defining the character of who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. Because of the love of God, the love of Christ, ultimately through faith, we want to engage in life by serving people and by ultimately helping them understand reconciliation to Christ. We haven't talked a lot about this statement, but this is our mission statement. We want to walk with people from disenchantment to discipleship, meeting people where they are and walking with them to help them discover and learn about being reconciled to God. Not standing there saying, hey, come here, I've got the answer. And that's why engaging with art, whether it's music or painting or literature or whatever form it may be, is so critical, because our world is full of it. And if we can see past the noise and understand the questions that are being raised and engage with people in their world, then we are better equipped to help walk with them, not shouting at them or just telling them where to go, but walk with them from their disenchantment to discipleship. It's actually not written by Elton John. It was written by his musical partner. His name was Bernie Taupin. And it's a statement of his own life experience where he and Elton John, he was writing the songs, Elton John was performing them, and they were hitting success after success after success. Bernie especially said, I was tired of not the success, but the hectic pace that was required to be successful. So I wanted all the good things that we were accomplishing, but I wanted it in a more tranquil setting. I want to go back to the good old days. Even though I've been very successful, and even though I'm supposed to have the answers within myself, life tells me I am not sufficient for the stuff that's out there. Three questions that we need to ask ourselves, and these are three questions that come up in art all the time. They're not the big three necessarily, but they're three very significant questions of the human dilemma, the human condition. What is our source of hope? What is meaning? And what is understanding? There are these wonderful texts. I love the book of Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, Solomon makes these observations in verses 8 to 10. Better is the end of the thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for angry lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. So Solomon is saying, don't ask the question, or don't assume that the good old days were better, which is essentially the message of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. We go forward just a couple of verses in that text, in chapter 7. It says, consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. So a couple of observations here. First, as Solomon is going to tell us why it's important to not find meaning in the past, but to be looking forward, to have hope, he uses these phrases: consider the work of God, and God has made. These two lines come right out of the creation narrative of Genesis. And if we were to translate it literally, it would be, consider the creation of God, for God has created. That's the language that Solomon is using here. He's establishing a backdrop to all of his commentary based on the fact that God is creator. And everything that exists because God put it in place. God has established the created order. Now, we have limitations in our humanity that we don't understand. We can't see everything and understand everything that's going on, so we struggle to put it into context. And I think what Solomon is talking about as he refers to this bit of wisdom is he's got in the back of his mind something that happened long ago in the book of Numbers that he wants his current readers to remember. So if we go to Numbers chapter 11, and if you have your Bibles, let's turn and look at this. Numbers chapter 11, the children of Israel are out in the desert, out in the wilderness, and they were infamous for their complaining while they were there. And in Numbers 11, verses 1 to 6, it says, "Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. And when the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was called Taberah, because the fire from the Lord had burned them. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said, 'If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, the melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna.' So they'd been out in the desert. They had nothing to eat. God miraculously provides manna for them. And after a while, they get tired of God's miraculous provision, and so they start to complain. And this, I think, is the backstory for Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Because what they're saying is, we want the good old days. Remember when we were in Egypt? We had all the food we wanted. We had cucumbers and melons and fish and everything. It was great, the good old days in Egypt. And they weren't that great. 400 years of slavery. They were abused. They were killed at will. They suffered incredible indignity. And yet they were so dissatisfied with God, they thought it would be better, just for the sake of a fresh cucumber, to go back to Egypt. And they say, "Oh, if only we could have the good old days back again." That story continues then. If you go ahead to chapter 14, it's the beginning of a pattern. In chapter 14, starting at verse 1, "That night all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud." And what had happened is the spies had gone out and they had come back and said, "The land is full of milk and honey, but it's also full of giants." And that's the best picture I could come up with for giants. Nobody took a selfie, so I don't have one. "All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, 'If only we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?' And they said to each other, 'We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt.'" The problem with the good old days is we have selective memory. We think about the stuff we like, and we forget the stuff that caused us hardship. Do not say, "The former things are better than these, for it is not from wisdom that you ask this." Where do we find meaning? If significance of life is to be found in front of us and not from behind us, where do we find meaning? Well, again, in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, Solomon makes this statement: "See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes." In other words, God made us and placed us in creation, and originally, before sin entered the picture, we had everything we needed for hope, meaning, and understanding. But because of sin, we now have confusion, we're lost, we're perplexed. But instead of going to God, our tendency is to figure it out for ourselves. And G.K. Chesterton, at least he's the guy who's credited with saying it, said, "God made man in his own image, and we have been so kind as to return the favor." We expect God to be like us. And that's my biggest struggle, is I think God should be like me. And I want to put my expectations on God to do what I want God to do, rather than taking a step back and asking, "Okay, God, if my tendency is to try and create all this in my own image, what am I missing here? How do I understand what it is to be dependent upon you?" We go to Ecclesiastes, this time chapter 11, verse 5. "As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb," and remember, this is written like thousands of years ago, before they had echograms and all that stuff, "so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. And again, he uses this creation language, the creator of all things. Now, it's kind of like, imagine if you had a bunch of penguins together who have lived North Pole, South Pole, wherever penguins live, and they had never seen an elephant, and they were trying to describe an elephant to one another. The image that you would come up with, in this particular case, they've done a pretty good job, but if you've never seen something, if you've never experienced something, it's very difficult to explain it. It's beyond your reality. You can't go there. And blind or blindfolded penguins have probably never experienced an elephant, and if they were to try to describe and explain the nature and habitat of an elephant and what one looks like, they'd be totally lost. And that's what Solomon is essentially saying, is there are things in life that are mystery, that are beyond our realm of understanding. So as we live life, as we try to find understanding, as we look forward, we have to remember that not everything in life is understandable. God has built mystery into life that we are always going to struggle, and there are always going to be things for the exact purpose of which we're just going to have to say why. And we will not necessarily always understand. That's a tension we have to learn to live with.